The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Good evening. I'm Donna Wares, editor of the LA Times Book Club. Thank you for joining us for AI Night. This evening, we'll be talking with two of the nation's leading researchers on the rapid rise of artificial intelligence and its impact on our humanity. Dr. Fei-Fei Li is co-director of Stanford University's Human-Centered AI Institute. Her new memoir, The Worlds I See, pairs AI's coming of age with her own personal coming of age story as a young immigrant overcoming every imaginable barrier. You'll also meet Dr. Joy Buolamwini, a computer scientist who is also founder of the Algorithmic Justice League. She set out to build robots at Georgia Tech and later at MIT. Instead, she found herself confronting inequalities embedded in the systems that control everything, from whether we get into college, get jobs, get access to healthcare, and even whether we get arrested. Her new book is Unmasking AI. The spotlight, she says, both shines and burns. Tonight, our guest authors will be in conversation with my colleague, Times audio director, Jazmín Aguilera. Times technology columnist Brian Merchant also joins the discussion a little later. And now, please join me in welcoming our first three guests to the LA Times Book Club's virtual stage. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So glad that you're here. I wanted to just start off the evening with Jazmín. Jazmín runs the Times podcast, and she was the one who had initially suggested this idea of an AI night several months ago. So I wanted to thank you for being our guest interviewer. And I thought before we started our discussion that you would perhaps set the table for us and for our audience of what to expect.
Yes, thank you, Donna. I think at least my initial motivation in talking about this more is I think many of us out here in the world are fascinated with AI, but also maybe a little bit overwhelmed, and the magnitude of the change it promises to bring and kind of already has brought, it feels very overwhelming. So it feels like everyone suddenly needs to be an expert in this field just to get a grip on what our futures are going to look like. So I'm very thankful to be talking to actual experts instead of my own head and real people. That's an AI joke. So thank you so much. In their new books, The Worlds I See and Unmasking AI, both of these authors contextualize AI also through the lens of their own personal experiences and points of view, and as experts and pioneers at the crest of this wave. So very happy to talk to you guys, at least from my own point of view and anxiety. So I'm happy that we have this conversation, and very pleased to have read both of your books.
Dr. Li, you're joining us this evening from Stanford?
Yes, and you can call me Fei-Fei.
Oh, okay. Great. We'll do that. And Dr. Joy, I know you like to be called Dr. Joy. You're joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts this evening, right?
I am. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Before we dig in, I want you to know that we've had so many questions from our Times readers who've been reading both books and joining the discussion over this month. And so the conversation we'll have tonight, some of the reader questions will shape that, and we'll bring on a few of the reader questions a little bit later. I want to mention that for every time we host a community book club night, we partner with a local bookstore. And I want to thank both of you for signing book plates. Our partner this evening is Chevalier's, which is the oldest independent bookstore in Los Angeles. And they have copies of Unmasking AI and The Worlds I See that are signed by our authors. And there's really no better gift than getting people signed books. So we always like people to support our independent booksellers for every event. I'm going to be rejoining you a little later, and I'll come back with some of those reader questions. But for now, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Jazmín. Take it away.
Thanks, Donna. So, Fei-Fei, I'd like to start with you because your book is very much a memoir of your life presented side by side, kind of your advancement in life as well as the advancements in AI and machine learning. And it felt like I was reading Game of Thrones, watching you grow up and watching AI grow up at the same time, as if they're two different characters intersecting. At the outset of writing, did you think about this book as a hybrid of reflection on AI as well as a reflection of your life? And what was your motivation for writing it that way?
Great question, Jasmine. First of all, very honored to be here. Very honored to be together with Dr. Joy. Um, I didn't set out to write a memoir. In fact, I was invited by a book agent to write a book about AI science at the beginning of the pandemic, so more than 3 years ago. And I spent a year writing a popular science book. I thought I'll write about the science that I participated in developing, the ushering in of the deep learning revolution, and what I know about AI. After a full year, I give the book draft to a very dear friend of mine, a philosopher at Stanford, and he literally called me to his backyard and said, "Fei-Fei, you've got to rewrite." And I was like, what? It's been a year and I can't wait to get rid of this phase of, to finish this race. And he said, look, there's a lot of AI technologists, but there are a lot of young immigrants, there are a lot of women, there are people of different backgrounds where they they don't have a voice and they would identify with your journey. And it also happens to be my own coming of age is so intertwined as a scientist with the coming of age of AI as a science. And that is partially because of my own work in AI, but partially because of serendipity, the cosmic connection, I guess I have. So it's a fun way to reconsider writing an intertwined story, a double helix of a human story, as well as the story of the making of the science. And at the very end of the day, as you probably realized, this book is a love letter. Is a love letter of the science that I love. It's also a love letter of the people who have supported me, and it's a way to show the world at the end of the day the science of AI as well as the impact of AI is about people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very similar for you, Dr. Joy. Your life experience was also very clearly a core theme of your book. And excuse me, also a necessity. One thing that really resonated with me is how you felt you needed to demonstrate your experience for it to be understood. Your titular example, of course, being the facial recognition, and how that demo failed to recognize your face, but it would register a white non-human mask. Could you explain that demo and tell us why you wanted to start your book with that, leading to your path of research and advocacy that you're on right now?
Oh, for sure. Well, first, I have to say, such an honor to be on this book club and also to be joined by, I will always call her Dr. Li. That's how I was raised, immigrant,
Thank you.
but that is fine. To the book, it was funny because when I was hearing Dr. Li speak, I also did not expect to add more of the personal elements that came later. I was working with a book coach and it tell me about your childhood. How did you feel? And so that's where it became more of the life I've lived and core experiences. So getting to the core experience of coding in a white mask, which is why the book is called Unmasking AI, why you see the mask here. And then now I just have a collection of masks all over my home. Is as I was a graduate student at MIT, I was working on a class project that used face tracking. And the face tracking system really wasn't tracking my face that well. And so it happened to be around Halloween time when I was testing this out. And I just so happened to have a white mask in my office. So as I was trying to figure out a way to get this to work, I first drew a face on my palm, and the face on my palm was detected when I held it up. So after that was detected, I thought, okay, anything's up for grabs. So I grabbed the white mask. Before I even have it all the way on my face, it was already being detected. And then I take it away and my dark skin isn't detected. So I'm thinking, whoa, this is a little weird. why is this happening? Is it the lighting conditions? Is it the angle? What's going on? So I had a sense there might be something off, but I had to do more than just my own personal experience and actually test out different AI systems on different types of faces to see if there were differences. So that's how I got into my work of doing AI tests or algorithmic audits.
And could you explain what the coded gaze is? You mentioned that a lot in your book, and that has to do with this demo.
Yes, so there's this notion of the male gaze or the white gaze, even for some, the post colonial gaze. So, this is adding to that lexicon as a cousin concept. And the idea of the coded gaze is really getting at power. Who has the power to shape the technologies that shape our lives? And in having that power, what priorities and preferences are embedded in that technology, but also what prejudices can slip in as well. And so this coding in a white mask experience for me was truly my first understanding that I was confronting what I now call the coded gaze that lurks within all of our technology.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really glad that, your book dived so much into that. And also with yours, Fei-Fei, with watching the early iterations of anything come up. Obviously, you're just trying to get something to understand, a very basic thing, and then that builds and builds and builds. So, real quick, I just want to take a kind of a sidestep into the human part of both of your books, the immigrant experience and also the first gen experience, and how bicultural people can find themselves in computer sciences, finding escape and comfort in the neutrality, so-called neutrality of STEM. Dr. Joy, you said you got into computer sciences to escape the messiness of all the isms, racism, sexism, classism, colorism, and the idea that at the time that you had that, there was this space that existed that was factual and free of influence and power structures, and it was just based in numbers and science and influence, free of that influence from messy humans. Looking back now, with where you are right now, how would you describe yourself then and that space and that what that allure was for you?
Yes, well, for me, as the daughter of an artist and a scientist, my dad being a professor of medicinal chemistry and my mom being a painter, I really grew up with science and art as literal companions and also figurative companions. And it wasn't really ever in my mind that there was something I couldn't do. I just grew up in an environment where I felt supported at home. I also grew up in Oxford, Mississippi. And so, as much as my parents wanted to create that sort of environment, I also had to confront the real world, right? With racism, colorism, and so forth. And so, when I found the world of computers and programming, it seemed like an area where all that mattered was the time and investment I put in to learning the concepts. And I found a lot of fun actually making websites for my sports team. I used to do websites for my sports team so I could get the swag without needing to pay the dues. And then I started to make a little money designing websites for organizations. And so for me, it was this pathway that had a little bit of an economic upside. I could explore various ideas. And also online, it felt like I could be anybody. I would be addressed with he, him pronouns, his pronouns as well when I was online. And so it was easy to buy into that notion that being within the tech space would somehow separate me, in terms of dealing with the messy isms. That was my initial approach. The more I got into tech, whether it was working in Zambia and then also in Ethiopia, neglected tropical diseases and really trying to use computer science for good, that's when I started to think a little bit more about power dynamics and who gets to build, who deploys, who's on the receiving end. And by the time I got to grad school, then I was in a better position to start grappling with more of the social implications of technology. But when I started out excited by robots, learning how to program, doing different competitions, getting into entrepreneurship, these were not the concerns that were top of mind at all. It felt very much like an escape for me.
Yeah, yeah. And how about you, Dr. Lee? How did you understand the world of tech and science when you started your journey, which would have been a different time and place in the
Yeah.
AI? Yeah.
As the book actually chroniques that journey, I like I said, it's a love letter. I was absolutely drawn to science, the beauty of the starry skies, the the mystery of where is the end of space time, the just I was a nerdy kid, a nerdy teenager, and physics was absolutely my favorite subject. I so much so that I insisted in majoring in physics. I went to Princeton, the American home of Albert Einstein, and one thing as a physics student that I learned, which really absolutely attracted me, is the the fearlessness of asking the most audacious questions that humanity might not ever find the answer. For example, the beginning of space-time, the smallest particles, the end of the universe. And I just love that till in the middle of my college, I started reading the physics giants like Albert Einstein and Schrodinger, and noticed that in the second half of their career, their imagination and curiosity didn't just stay within the atomic world. They are starting to ask equally audacious and mysterious and curious questions of life and intelligence. And that really piqued my interest. And I find myself um, very fascinated by the question of intelligence itself and intelligent machines. And I just, after college, I just decided to pursue that as a PhD student at Caltech, where I studied both AI as well as computational neuroscience. So it's very much that core innate curiosity and that drove, that has been guiding me till today, as I do my science.
Would you consider yourself a techno optimist?
um I think I am a scholar, and I think I would like to consider, especially as the book says, I actually have gone from a pure scientist to a scientist slash or hyphen humanist, because I think, I'm probably a lot older than Dr. Joy, so I belong to the generation that made this technology that helped to create the modern AI and brought it to life, brought it to the society. And I see my human responsibility. I see that technology itself, math might be simple, 1 + 1 is always 2, but technology's human impact is messy, and we have to recognize our responsibility. And I wouldn't just call it optimism. I see opportunities, but I also see perils. I see risks. I just want to be a responsible scholar and educator and technologist that responsibly communicates and creates technology.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that because it resonates so well with me and how I read some of your book, Dr. Joy. You'd said that you would wanted to find this apolitical space. You wanted to be a maker and not a critic at the outset, because you didn't want to come in here and start criticizing everything to tear it down. You very much wanted to be a part of it. And to build things also, but responsibly, which I think is a little bit of what we all hope that people in your position believe, and it's so great to see that it's true. Where do you think that your desire, Dr. Joy, to believe in that neutral space came from, and why did you want to avoid being a critic at the outset of getting into AI?
Yeah, those are great questions. For me, being a young Black immigrant and having the opportunity to be in privileged spaces, right? So to, earn a Rhodes Scholarship to go to all of the various schools I've had the opportunity to go to, I realized those aren't opportunities everybody gets. And so there was certainly shyness on my part for perhaps rocking the boat or seeming ungrateful, and then thinking about all that my parents, put into making these opportunities possible. I was not exactly wanting to be the gadfly. I am an optimist by nature. I am named Joy. This is part of how I am and how I show up in the world. And a lot of my early tech explorations were so much about what's possible, what can we create. Even my project with the Aspire Mirror was an art installation. And then later on, I was doing another project where you could paint walls with your smile. So you would use face tracking to get faces to then do map projection onto a wall. And this musical mural with each movement would have its own beat and stroke. So I'm very bought into the whimsical thing, which is part of what drew me to the MIT Media Lab. And I was not so much thinking about responsibility as much as possibility. And because of that, that's where having more of a apolitical orientation towards tech at that time in my ongoing development felt safer, because I also knew that if I were to challenge power, right, to call out isms, then that could put a target on me. And I was just trying to graduate, trying to finish a class project, finish the assignment. I'm not trying to make headlines, just trying to make it to the next stage on the academic path. So there was certainly fear and also an understanding that if I were to speak up, people might listen. So I had to be sure that I wanted to take that on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your book really dives into the moral and ethical implications of not scrutinizing technology. And Dr. Li, you started your book at that pivotal moment with the what you call the tech lash of 2018, testifying before Congress. I mean, it's safe to say, obviously, that we've all been on a roller coaster of emotions with how people feel about AI and tech advances in general. For me, I remember trying out ChatGPT for the first time and being very amazed and excited about how much work it's going to save me, but also scared. And there's just a lot of uncertainty out in the world. How would you both describe the moment that we're in right now with AI, specifically in your circles, people who are in the know and understand where we are? And what are those conversations like? What are people just as apprehensive and excited as we are, or whoever wants to answer first, Fei-Fei or Dr. Joy? Fei-Fei?
Sure. I'll go first. Well, I think the release of the large language model almost precisely a year ago, a little bit, a couple of more weeks, was an inflection point. It's an inflection point in the sense of technology that we now have very general purpose, strong tools like the ChatGPT that shows the power of this technology, and it will empower businesses and many applications. We're seeing a flurry of applications, and that's just the beginning. In the meantime, I think it's even more important. It's an inflection of a public awakening. It's especially reflected in policymakers' interest. I know that Dr. Joy also participates in a lot of policy conversation and has contributed to the policy world a lot over the past several years. But frankly, AI and policy was not a thing for many years, or it was a, somewhat sub-threshold thing. But ChatGPT has really changed that. It is, Jazmín, even in the heart of Silicon Valley, even in the tech world, it is a very mixture of strong feelings, excitement, confusion, concerns, and you dial from total utopia to total dystopia, and this gives me even more sense of clarity what my responsibility is, as well as what the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI's responsibility is to focus on the human-centered AI framework, focus on human-centered AI research, education, policy communication, and so on.
Yeah, that's real great. And Dr. Joy, do you have anything to add on in what you are hearing in your circles?
Yes, so there is the swinging between hype and doom, fear and fascination. I am different types of circles, right? So as a new author, I think I've been thinking a lot more about creatives. As somebody who recorded the audiobook and had different experiences with creating Unmasking AI, I'm now a new member of the National Association of Voice Actors. I'm now part of the Authors Guild, and I model from time to time. They have their associations as well, and so I've really been thinking about endangered professions. And when I talk to creatives, there's so much fear for where the rhetoric of enhancement becomes the reality of replacement. And so a lot of conversation thinking through, what do creative rights look like? What would consent processes look like? Compensation, right? How would you have control over the use of your copyrighted work or other types of work? And also, what kind of credit are artists receiving? I would argue that the powerful outputs we see with AI systems, generally without that fine tuning on the best of humanity, right, feels hollow and plastic. And so there's that space. I'm also in the tech justice space with the work that I do with the Algorithmic Justice League. And in those circles, a lot of the conversation is making sure that, just as Dr. Li was saying, this public awakening, this awareness and prioritization of AI on policy agendas does not leave behind those who have already and historically been marginalized. I talked to researchers from the global south where they point out to the convenings that are happening, and they're saying, where is our seat at the table? And so I do think there's a possibility where we don't just have a digital divide, but we have an AI chasm. With the Algorithmic Justice League, we hear from who we call the excoded, those who are harmed or convicted, condemned, otherwise facing the negative impacts of technology. And they want to know, how can we protect ourselves? And then there are others who want to dive in. I mean, so again, my background's in computer science. And so I also have more of my tech community where there is so much excitement about what AI can mean and what generative AI systems can do in terms of their own productivity, but also creative exploration. So I feel in the circles that I frequent, just as Dr. Li was saying, you have a variety of perspectives, approaches, concerns, and fear. And I certainly view part of my work is making sure that the voices of the excoded are heard, because I do think we certainly hear what the potential and possibility of AI is. And so our work is documenting what goes wrong, how it goes wrong, so we can prevent it.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that you brought up the creatives. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, or towards the end, because that's a huge thing I'm thinking of as a podcaster. But to take to your other point, the how these things are created, who gets X-coded, you spend some time in your book talking about how default settings are not neutral. They're choices, categories, and a lot of artificial intelligence is kind of reliant on these massive data sets and how those data sets are constructed using categorization and labels. I'm just wondering, after reading your book, I really understand how much an overwhelming task it is to like look at all of this and how it dynamically works together. Um, what what is what do you wish people understood better about how that is created? Could you walk us through just kind of like a explain like I'm five version of categories and their role in creating these systems, um, and how you wish people understood that in terms of it being X-coded?
Sure. I think for me, it's always important to bring in the human element. And so when you hear artificial intelligence, when you see technology, you don't always see the human fingerprints that go into the decision making that then determines the types of products you interact with. And so in the book, I talk a lot about data sets and in particular face data sets. And I go through the process of actually labeling, is this face perceived man or woman? What is the skin type? What is the age? And also who is deciding? And part of why I walk the readers through really, I'm taking you behind the scenes of if some undergrad wanted to work with me and they have to go in and touch the data and do all of the labeling. And I mean, Dr. Lee's work shows just how important the data is for AI in general. The reason I walk people through that is so it's not a mystery. It's not magic. You understand that we are training machines to recognize patterns, and these patterns come from somewhere, and these classifications come from somewhere, often us. So when I was trying to classify race, for example, that got very messy because across the world, there are different types of classifications. Some use ethnicity, some use what they will say visible minorities, some will use color. Like in Brazil, I remember going to the Australian Statistics Bureau and they had, I think, over 1,000 different ethnic categories. I remember going to ethniccelebs.com and then it got confusing because people are mixed race. And race never felt more constructed in my mind than when I was truly going through that process of trying to come up with a classification and understanding these classifications have histories and stories that reflect cultures, that reflect geography, and thus reflect our human choices and decisions.
Yeah, and another huge obstacle that you had mentioned, that was the obstacle before you got into this, was just the ability of even tapping into a data set, period. You know, it wasn't something that like the internet introduced an opportunity to find resources, but you still got to put it into some kind of data set to plug into. You still got to create a massive data sets, get the okay, make sure that they're labeled. There's so much work that goes into just the very first step, and that's why I want to talk to you, Fei-Fei, about ImageNet. For listeners who don't know what ImageNet is, it's huge breakthrough in AI. It was this huge data set that trained, and I'll let you actually, because you'll be able to better explain it than I can. But it's how future models. It was kind of like the proto model of what these are all built on. So, Fei-Fei, could you do a better explanation than that, and we can talk about that breakthrough and its role?
Yeah, I'm always fascinated to hear other people explaining ImageNet, it always teaches something new to me about ImageNet. But Jazmín, you're totally right. ImageNet is in the modern AI, contemporary AI timescale is an earlier project began in 2007 and finished around 2009, 2010. And it was the first time that in AI, we put a stick on the ground and say that this technology, in order to have a breakthrough in AI, it's very likely we have to recognize the central role data plays in addition to algorithms. And it's mathematically a very important concept. And I'm not going to get into the details why, but we are the first team that recognize this, and we assemble this probably at that time the largest AI dataset called ImageNet, over 15 million images labeled using a linguistic taxonomy dictionary called WordNet, over 22,000 different kind of labels of generic objects, and it was open source to the entire research world. And 2012, the combination of neural network algorithm, data provided by ImageNet, and 2 GPUs by NVIDIA created this watershed moment that many people would consider 2012 the beginning of deep learning revolution that eventually led to where we are now.
You said before that AI is a tool that humans, are employing or exert with, rather than this like independent techno-cultural force that we just can't stop. It's happening. Like we wield this power, and that feeling of it being this like independent force is really a popular way of talking about AI right now. What role do you think that humans have in controlling how it's used now and maybe into the future?
Yeah, Jazmín, you hit on a trigger point for me as an educator. I go around the world, people call me professor, teacher, and I find it so frustrating when the agency is given to AI. We don't give agency to electricity. We don't give the same agency to cars. I understand why AI can be anthropomorphized in that way, but it is a software tool. It's a powerful tool. So I try to clarify as much as I can that the agency is within human. There is no independent machine values. Machine values are human values, and how we use this tool, how we design it, how we use it, how we build into decision making, how we build into action are all part of human design and human choice. So the fundamental agency is within humans. And when we recognize that, it's the corollary or the natural consequence of that recognition is responsibility. We have to recognize our own responsibility. If you give agency to AI, you almost give up the responsibility. But once you recognize the agency is within ourselves, then the responsibility is also within ourselves. And that's one important dimension of human-centered AI is human responsibility. And that's really, really important, especially in today's AI communication, where there's just so much hyperbole in even the language we use surrounding AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this way that people talk about AI, like we've opened this Pandora's box and all this stuff is going to happen. And I could understand why people feel like that. Sometimes I feel like that, where it just feels like the technology is going to advance faster than we can scrutinize it and make sure that it's not going to be harmful before it's beneficial. Do you feel that way? Do you sometimes, or is this a changing feeling? I'm curious about that feeling of a tool becoming more useful than we're ready to deal with.
Are you asking me or Dr. Joy?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm asking you.
Yes, I do feel it's a changing tool. I do feel that with all tools, there are moments that its power might require very much guardrails and control. And humanity's our entire civilization's history with tools is a very complex one. We were making tools at the beginning of our civilization, and every time we make a tool, be it a stone axe and then fire, steam engine, and all that, we 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 bring out the good and the bad and the ugly, right? We have good use of the tools and we have bad use of the tool, and we sometimes have unintended consequences of the tool. So some of this, our relationship with AI is changing as this technology is advancing, and it's so important to recognize that. But again, I don't want people to give up hope, because I think, especially for people of all background, all walks of life, the entire world, because we are still the ones in control if we put our minds to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It reminds me, there was an article that I'd read, I believe on the New Yorker, about how advances in communication technology specifically led to societal upheaval, either in a good way or a bad way, or just kind of a everything kind of way. The invention of radio, the invention of the internet, social media just kind of followed these little topsy-turvy times, and maybe we're heading into that as well, but they all kind of smoothed out eventually, so maybe that's the hope there. Dr. Joy, you actually had some closed door meetings with the Biden administration not too long ago, and kind of circulating on this idea. Do you think that your message is being heard in those closed door meetings, especially as it pertains to how we're going to scrutinize and regulate, or whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that this doesn't spiral out of control?
Yes, Dr. Lee actually joined me in that particular meeting that you are referring to. And in my experience, not just with President Biden, but also in different policy spaces, 2023 has certainly been a watershed moment. I remember back in 2016 when I would mention AI bias, eyes would glaze over. What are you even talking about? And so to have the president of the United States putting it as a priority, I think is quite some progress, to say the least, to have the UK AI Safety Summit that just happened a few weeks ago, to have a UN AI Advisory Council. We have made some progress. As far as our people listening, I would say policymakers, as always, have so many different stakeholders with various agendas. So sometimes you'll have tech companies speaking, sometimes you'll have academics speaking, sometimes you'll have advocates and activists speaking. Who I seldom see in those spaces are the people who've been impacted the most. So that's when I had the opportunity to meet President Biden alongside Dr. Lee. I actually brought in a photo of Robert Williams and his two daughters. So Robert Williams was uh, falsely arrested due to AI-powered facial recognition in front of his daughters and his wife and his neighbors. And so it was an entry point into, can machines be biased? Can they exhibit racism? And then also what we should do about it. And so what I was advising is that there's an opportunity for the United States to lead on biometric rights, so that it's not just the case that any police department can run your photo and then you're falsely arrested, or that you have to submit your face in order to fly or to have access to basic government services, whether it's veterans benefits or accessing your tax information through the IRS. So that was part of the conversation that happened in that room. And I'm sure Dr. Lee can speak to other elements of that conversation as well.
Fei-Fei, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, first of all, yeah, it was a great honor to meet with President Biden and along with Dr. Joy. In that conversation, the topic I was double click on is actually the importance of investing in public sector AI, and I'm sure that the world sees today's AI advances coming from private sector, especially the big tech supported companies. And there's a lot of greatness in this. And America has always prided itself in this innovation engine in our ecosystem, including private sector. But this ecosystem is also needs to be healthy and balanced, because AI is such an important technology. It is a horizontal tool that can empower scientific discovery that goes from discovering drugs for rare diseases to mapping biodiversity to superpowering learning and teaching. And a lot of this need to happen, especially in the early explorative curiosity-driven phase, need to happen in the public sector. And in addition, public sector has always been a trusted source in evaluating, explaining, measuring what what technology and sciences are. And I think it's really important that we maintain that healthy ecosystem. Yet today in America, not a single university has the resource to train a ChatGPT algorithm. And if we deprive public sector from the adequate resource, we are really missing the opportunity of doing the good things I just mentioned above. So I think that was what I shared with President Biden, to try to adopt a moonshot mentality towards public sector investment in AI.
Yeah, absolutely. With great power comes great responsibility, and I'm so happy that you guys were in that room, to be honest. We've been talking about our tech future, and I'd also like to introduce a writer who offers a fascinating look into our tech past. Brian Merchant is the LA Times technology columnist and author of the new book, Blood in the Machine: The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech. Welcome, Brian.
Hello. Oh, I'm close there.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
For
This has been a great chat so far.
Yeah. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about why you wrote Blood in the Machine and why this history is so relevant to what we're discussing right now and concerns around artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, the reason I wrote the book, it can be gleaned pretty much from what Dr. Joy was talking about a few minutes ago, talking about the way that artists have suddenly found themselves in this situation where AI systems are being used to scrape and profit from the works that they created. And that's just one really kind of powerful example of what's going on across a bunch of different industries and fields and professions right now, where there are kind of emergent threats to livelihoods and to people's workplaces. And even before this AI craze, kind of sprung forth this year, there was a whole, another mode of disruptive work, algorithmically organized gig work and Uber and Lyft and all that kind of things, and on it goes. So it seemed to me that there is a trend or a cycle that repeats itself here, and I thought I would trace this cycle all the way back to its roots. And I went back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the first time that machinery was being used to automate away jobs, as we would call it today, or to mechanize work. And the book that I wound up writing is Blood in the Machine, and it's about the Luddites, who are maybe some of the most famous resistors of technology in the workplace, when it's being used in ways that look pretty familiar to what's going on today. So yeah, I thought that by telling that story and recognizing that these very real and very justified concerns and fears over automation and the economic pressures that are created when somebody with a lot of resources has the power to wield an automating technology against people that might not have as much power to or say in how that technology shapes their lives. So we're kind of at another point like that right now, and I think it's useful to peel it apart, both to recognize that it keeps happening and why it keeps happening, and to see what we can learn from it, what we can learn from the Luddites as we face this new frontier today.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you have questions for our guests, so I will pass it over to you to ask those specific questions.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of questions for you. We could pick your brains for hours. It's both of the work that you've done is so inspiring in different ways. Dr. Joy knows we had a chance to talk a few days ago, and that was fun. But I'm curious to hear a little bit more, especially from you, Fei-Fei, about what you think AI and the big AI companies stand to do to the world of work. I think I could not agree more that we need a big public investment in AI, and to have more of this sort of stewarded by the universities and public institutions, because right now it's all sort of in the hands of the private sector. And I'm wondering, going down this trajectory, do you think it's possible for these large companies to be good stewards of this technology, especially when it comes to the ways that it stands to intersect with work? I'm thinking of how Sam Altman just said last week that 80% of all jobs stand to be automated or eliminated by AI. Of course, he's got some skin in that game because he's selling companies tools how to automate some work. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how we navigate some of this terrain going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I look forward reading your book. So first of all, let's just be clear. I don't know what's in the human brains of the big tech companies. I work at Stanford, so I think, like I said earlier, a private sector plays a huge role in technology development, especially in modern industrialized capitalism. That is a fact, and it has created a lot of amazing things, from cars to airplanes to PCs to modernized medicines. And but I absolutely believe that we are in a multi-stakeholder economy. We can not just have one sector to have both, build the technology and create the rule and tell us how to use it and do all that. We need a multi-stakeholder approach. So look, you're studying history. Every technology that we have been inventing in the past, I guess, modern days, let's just say 100 years plus, we have put guardrails around them. We from cars to airplanes and all that. Have we done a perfect job? Absolutely not. Look at internet and social media. We're still grappling with that. But have we done some level of jobs in certain things? Yes, from FDA to transportation and all that. So I think AI is entering the phase of rubber meets the road. It's entering the phase of facing regulatory policies. The real question is, how do we make it right? Who has a say? Who is guiding the governments, not just government? And these are the real work. And frankly, Brian, I just want to say, and I'm sure Dr. Joy feels this, the public hears people with the biggest megaphone. but a lot of real work are being done by people without the megaphone. And you just mentioned all AI is done in industry. It's not true. There's incredible AI going on in public sector. And I'm heartened to be part of that. I'm heartened to see that. I want to do a better job communicating with the public. But the truth is, underneath or strip away the loudest voices, the world is actually very complex and there is a lot happening.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mean to give the impression that so much great work is being done at a lot of great public universities. All the most sort of path-breaking stuff, in my opinion, is being done at public universities. But I would be curious to hear Dr. Joy carry that thought into the sort of the next realm of like, how do we sort of, you have been having these great conversations, and like Jazmín, I'm glad that you two are in those rooms, and then that alone is some progress. So it's not just company CEOs and folks like that. So I'm curious, from having been in those rooms and being encouraged by some of the fact that it's being brought up at all, what to you are the next steps? Like what are the most actionable parts? Like what sort of guardrails do you see as being the most viable to becoming a reality? And what should we all sort of at home be sort of playing along? Like how should we be supporting the creation of good AI policy?
I like that question. And before addressing that question, I want to speak a little bit to what you mentioned in terms of AI and the economy, and specifically with jobs. I think it was last Tuesday, Sam Altman and we were in conversation as part of the Unmasking AI book tour, and this conversation came up. And one notion I want to share with this audience that I brought up there was this idea of the apprentice gap. So, what happens if choose your percentage of jobs are replaced, and particularly entry level jobs? And so, bear with me. Recently, I started playing guitar again. Finally finished the book, right? I was feeling like I have free time. It's like, but I got a guitar. And as I was playing, I still had my calluses from all of the years of prior practice. And it made me think of this notion of professional calluses, the things we learn, maybe doing the mundane essentials, maybe labeling the data sets or whatever else it might be, and how that's a pathway to greater mastery. So if you have AI systems that are automating some of the more entry level work, are we at risk of living in the age of the last experts or the last masters? And if that is a potential risk, what do we do now, right? So that we continue to exercise our intelligence and exercise the elements that actually create a sustained profession or workforce. And so that was part of the conversation that we were having around jobs. To your other question, in terms of what kind of policies need to be put in place, I am encouraged by the executive order on AI that was announced by the Biden-Harris administration. And the reason I'm encouraged by that is because it builds on the AI blueprint Bill of Rights, which puts in words, right? Protections from algorithmic discrimination. It puts in as a value that should be a value. Another value is safe and effective systems, the type of facial recognition systems. Falsely arresting Robert Williams, certainly not safe for Robert and his family, certainly not effective. So making sure systems are actually fit to purpose before they're adopted would be a huge first step. Is this AI system that we're about to invest in going to work? Or are we believing in possibility and potential without actually doing a reality check? The other element that I think is really important from the blueprint is this notion of human alternatives and fallback. So I've been hearing from different teams within the government because a few years ago, Algorithmic Justice League, we talked about the IRS adopting a third party company to do face scans for people to access their tax services and all of the issues that came with that. So, 70-year-old man in Colorado with slow internet trying to get his veterans benefits and unable to do so. And so, an alternative idea was to say that I think most Americans live within 10 miles of a post office. Is it possible to have post offices be a place for verification? So we're reusing existing infrastructure. And so I do think not always going to the automated answer as the default or only is important. As far as what can everyday people do, this is part of why I wrote Unmasking AI, to underscore how important our stories are, how important having the courage to share your experiences with AI, your concerns, the things that didn't work so well, the hopes you have for it, because in doing so, you encourage others to also share their story. When the documentary Coded Bias came out, which is just one of many chapters within the book, I was just struck by how many people reached out because they felt seen, or they felt that maybe the questions that they had, because they didn't have a tech background, weren't valid. And to see, other people having those questions truly was a sense of validation. And so as you encounter AI systems, you encounter their possibilities, but you also experience their harms. We encourage people to share those stories. That's why we have a whole harms reporting platform where the X-coded, those harmed by AI systems, come and share different types of experiences. It might be you go to the airport and you didn't know you could opt out of facial recognition. You didn't see the signs. It might be that your kid was flagged for cheating, but you're also learning that certain AI systems that are meant to detect cheating actually will flag those who have English as a second language as cheating, even if they're not. So there are different types of stories and encounters. And I think that's something we can all do. And more of us will have stories because AI is being adopted in many areas of our lives.
I think that's a great way to end. I will throw now to questions from our Times readers. Before I do that, I want to do a quick shout out recommendation to our readers. I read Fei-Fei's book first, which gave me a really good understanding, because I was one of those people, I'm interested in it and I'm trying to understand it, but I'm trying to wrap my mind around it as a non-tech person and not be embarrassed by doing that, because my entire family's full of tech people. So I highly recommend reading both of these books. And if you're going to do that and haven't done that yet, do Fei-Fei's first and then Dr. Joy's. I really felt like I feel very I really can't thank you both enough for helping set an understanding that's based in story, that's based in something I can relate to. I really, really appreciate that. And so with that, I will throw to Donna, who will take questions from the listeners, viewers. Listen to me with podcast words.
Well, thank you so much to all three of you, well, to all four of you and Brian as well, for this fascinating discussion. We've had a lot of questions. We had over 100 questions come in from readers, and you touched on many of the subjects. But one of the things we always see from book club is our readers are always interested in the process. So the first one I'm going to start with is a question from reader Nantar Ferris. And she would like to know from each of our authors, what kind of personal growth did you get while writing your book? Can I start with Fei-Fei?
Thank you. I think the most important personal growth is something that I have known, but just feels tremendously reminded, is gratitude. I live in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has this culture that, especially in tech circle, that I'm a genius and I'm born out of, I don't know, and and it's all about me being a genius. But it's not my journey. My journey is that so many people within my family, outside of my family, in my technology community, including my students, they supported me, they helped me, and we help each other to make the science happen. And I'm just so grateful, and I wanted that story to be told. I want the public to share that journey with the scientists and to realize there's a lot of human hearts in the making of science and hopefully in the deployment of science.
Before we move to Dr. Joy, I would like to follow up on one thing you mentioned. One of the most touching things to me in your book was where you talk about the role of a teacher who made such a difference, not only in your early life, but throughout your journey. Can you just, I know we're running a little late on time, but I have to, could we just talk a little bit about your beloved teacher?
Yeah,
would you share a
Donna,
bit of that
thank you.
story?
I think you're referring to Mr. Bob Sabella, who is a New Jersey public high school math teacher. It's just not me. He's a very tough love math teacher. He's known to be so generous and kind to especially the ESL, the immigrant students from all backgrounds. And he kind of adopted me as a student, as a teenager, and his family embraced me. So starting my journey as a teenager all the way through my college, my grad school, including when I was, grown up doing my professor, early professor years. He's just always being a mentor and a supporter. And I do want to say he is the first American friend and first American family I have. He and his family embodies America for me.
Thank you. And I would really encourage people to go and read your book. That is one of the most poignant, threads and stories. So going back to our original questions, Dr. Joy, I'll just repeat it. What kind of personal growth did you get while writing your book?
I want to piggyback on teachers because part of why my brother is a teacher, and he teaches elementary school is because being immigrants and coming to the US, he also had a teacher who made such an imprint on him that he wanted to be that kind of person for others, and he continues to do so. And I come from a family of teachers, so very happy on the teachers. For me with the book, my process was hectic. So, like Dr. Li, I think we both started in 2020. I started a little bit, then had to pause to write another book known as the dissertation for my PhD. So then once I finished the PhD, I said, oh, wait, I'm past the deadline. So the book was 2 years late, but just on time. Great time to talk about AI. So I actually did a 6-week writing boot camp where I woke up, worked out, listened to my Gregorian chants, and then along that path, I joined a drum circle. And the drum circle was actually really a healing space for me. And it was a drum circle at a Quaker meeting house. So it lots of different generational gaps, but led by a Black man with big dreadlocks who goes by Toussaint the Liberator, but his government name is Paul Barrett. So it was actually in that drum circle that I met somebody who encouraged me to read the book, The Artist Way. And that book, I'm sure, some of your listeners, readers, and others might be familiar, but for those who aren't, it's really a guidebook to help creatives unlock and unblock whatever obstacles might be in their way for doing that work. And so for me, I would always have an excuse for not writing. And then as I read The Artist's Way, it really showed me that writing was a process, not a stroke of inspiration every now and again. And so that gave me the kind of discipline I needed to write the majority of the book in that 6-week sprint. And then, of course, there's revisions, which takes a whole other time. But that growth for me, I think one of the memories I have most with the writing process, there was one day where I, being the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League and having other responsibilities, I had things I had to take care of. And so generally I would write from 9 to about 4 with breaks in between. That day I didn't get writing until 4, and it would have been so easy for me to say the day is over. But it was that day that I think I wrote about 4,000 words, and at that time I was averaging about 1,000 words a day. I'm a former pole vaulter and athlete, so I like once I'm in my process, I'm very regimented, and then I have goals to hit just to keep me going. And so because on the day I felt the least motivated, the most tired, I wrote the most, and it was all something I could use and did use for the book. It kind of unlocked a piece with my psyche where I realized, no, I show up and I follow the process and it will get done. So that was some growth in my own writing process. And so I credit the drum circle and the people in the drum circle being willing to share the tools and tips that, because most of them were retired, etc. And they were getting a kick out of all my busyness, so it was a nice change of pace and perspective for me.
Well, that sounds great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you both for sharing such wonderful stories. It's funny that you mentioned teachers and educators. We just talked about it because we had quite a few questions come in from teachers. And I'm going to share one of them now from Miriam Isles. And she would like to know, how can a teacher effectively use AI with students to support their learning? Do you have suggestions? Go back to Fei-Fei for that one.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam, for asking that question. First of all, AI is still a unfolding technology. It's using learning, and education is also, unfolding. I think I'm also an educator. The way I look at it is look at it as a tool, and how we have always been teaching our children to use tools ethically and responsibly and critically. And the end goal of education is to to help our students to have their own agency in learning. And I think I go back to that first principle that AI is the tool, and we have certain values of using those tools. But I would embrace it in a responsible, ethical way, because it's a useful tool.
Dr. Joy, your thoughts?
One, I think it's a bit meta for all of these AI tools that are being used. I would encourage educators and learners to read the privacy policies, read the terms of service, have a bit of an understanding of what the parameters of your interactions are. Is the data that is being entered, what happens to it? And maybe learn a little bit about how the systems themselves were created, right? Were they created with ethical AI pipelines? So there's a bit of meta aspect to it. A personal experience I had with AI in the classroom that gave me a different view of using it was I did an executive education course earlier this year. And the professor used a tool where in a class of about 60 people, we would do readings and then we would write reflections. And so in this case, we wrote the reflections on Google Form. And then one of their TAs, teaching assistants, had created a tool that would take all of our reflections and then summarize the reflections for the whole class, and then also pick out certain quotes. And so it was supporting us having a better understanding of our peers and thus reflecting on our own perspectives. And so I thought that was an interesting use that I hadn't quite seen, and I found it to be helpful in supporting our learning experience as students in that course.
Well, thank you. So we are really running a bit over time. I'm going to just cut to one final question. Many of our that echoes a theme that many of our readers asked about. There was a lot of concern about workplace, which we've talked about in the future. But this final question comes from Susan Nordrum, and it's kind of an open-ended question that I thought would be a good question that you can take anywhere you want. Dr. Joy, is it realistic to think the world can come together to address the AI threats? What's your take?
I am absolutely certain that the world can come together to address AI threats. I do think under pressure, humanity does have a good record of figuring things out. We survived as a species until this point. But I don't think that is going to happen if we only have those who are most powerful and those with the loudest megaphones leading the conversation. And so I do think it's important to think through how we bring in the experiences and the perspectives of the ex-coded as we're thinking through the threats of AI, and that it's not just the people who are creating the systems, but people who are experiencing the burdens and not necessarily getting all of the benefits who are part of shaping how we address the threats.
Dr. Fei-Fei Li, can you address what's your take?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Joy. I think humanity is a species proven to be resilient. We do a lot of stupid things, but I guess I always believe in what Dr. King said, the arc of history bend towards justice, and hopefully in AI also bend towards responsibility.
Well, on that note, what a wonderful note to end our chat. And I just want to just thank you all for this fascinating conversation. I want to just share before we wrap up a few quick announcements. Our next book club is December 12th, and we'll have an evening with California Poet Laureate Lee Herrick, and he'll join us to talk about his work and his first year as our state's poet-in-chief and his fascinating new initiative that's coming up to get everyone writing poetry. So I'm looking forward to that. If you haven't already, please sign up for the book club newsletter. You'll find out about upcoming events, and we also share recordings and links to previous book club nights. Like if you wanted to share this event, you'll find it in the next book club newsletter, and it'll make it easy for you to just keep up on everything we're doing. And we have some amazing events coming. I just want to thank all of our readers who support our community book club through the new LA Times Community Foundation. We are so lucky that every month, these are some of our recent donors, and we want to like to shout you out by name. And we really do depend on our readers and our community. We're very lucky to have a community book club that we can time hosts of both virtual conversations for free like this one. We do many community events. And when you sign on as a benefactor, your contribution is tax deductible, and you're really making a big difference. So thank you all. And I hope more people will join us for 2024. And finally, I would like to thank Fei-Fei Li, Dr. Joy, Jazmín, and Brian, just for this, for joining us this evening. This has just been really eye-opening, and I really think we could talk for 2 more hours and not even cover all the ground. And I like to end our evening asking our authors to give you the last word. And so I'd like to start with Fei-Fei. What would you like readers to take away from your book?
I think at the end of the day, especially for the young readers, this book is about North Star, is about pursuing the North Star you believing with courage, with imagination, with perseverance, and with gratitude. And no matter what your North Star is, with those things, you'll be on a very thrilling journey. And I hope to see many of you see AI and human-centered AI as your North Star.
And the title again of your book is the worlds I see, which I should have mentioned. Dr. Joy, what would you like readers to take away from Unmasking AI?
Unmasking AI is an invitation to be part of the AI conversation. So I love to say if you have a face, you have a place in the conversation. It's important that everyone has a voice and a choice in shaping what AI should be. And I hope you walk away from reading the book feeling like we can make AI work well, not just for the privileged few, but also for those who've been historically marginalized and excoded. So far, those who have read the book, who have shared their thoughts on it, they're like, how do I join the Algorithmic Justice League? Let's go make the world a better place. And that's how I want people to feel, because the stories show ways in which change has happened. And that's why I'm still optimistic, right? That we can create that world where technology works well for all of us and not just the privileged few.
Well, thank you to our amazing guests. Thank you to all of our readers who joined us this evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Night.